Donc, merci beaucoup, Frédéric, et bonjour tout le monde. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous ce matin. Encore une fois, j'étais ici l'année passée, je m'excuse. Yes, I was here last year as president of Treasury Board, and I'll say that since then, as Frederick mentioned, I've been appointed to a new portfolio. And so I'm going to talk a little bit within the theme of today's conference being scaling for sustainability. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few things, 3 things that have been on my plate and I'll be working on over the next number of months. And in particular, let me start, though, with the broad macroeconomic picture and Canada's economic indicators. By that, I mean the AAA credit rating, the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7, and of course, low and declining inflation. We know that inflation fell to 1.6% in September. It has now been in the Bank of Canada's target range for 9 months in a row, and the bank has lowered interest rates 3 times, making Canada the first country in the G7 for that to occur. Let me just say that those are strong macroeconomic indicators, but we know, and there has been much talk in the press lately about Canada's declining per capita GDP or productivity levels. And that's where I want to start in terms of issues that I'm addressing. The Treasury Board is responsible, as Frederick mentioned, for overseeing the expenditures of government programs that leave the government of Canada. The Treasury Board's also responsible for the public service as a whole. That's over 300,000 public servants. And so I said to myself last year that I personally, within the government apparatus, can start to address the productivity issue in terms of the public service, the public sector. The public sector accounts for about 40% of Canada's overall GDP. That's a number from the IMF. That's all levels of government. But we know that there is a significant contribution that the public sector makes to our economic health overall as a country. And so what I said is I will tackle this issue. I will convene a working group. I've published mandate and terms of reference for this working group, and we'll be appointing members shortly. Why? Why is it important? Not just because of that 40% level, but we've got to start within the government of Canada to address this issue ourselves from a public sector standpoint. Of course, there have been studies on the private sector contributions that the government and other businesses must be able to make to overall productivity levels in this country. And I want to say that this is a government issue, but it is also a private sector issue. The private sector has to make sure that it itself is looking at efficiencies within their own businesses. For example, with the adoption of new technologies, that's something we'll be looking at from a government standpoint in terms of AI. For example, in terms of investing in assets, investing in your own technology and infrastructure. And from a governmental standpoint, we'll also be looking at replacement of legacy systems. So turning over very old systems. And I hope that April and I will look at this in the Q&A. Second item is barriers to trade. Listen, interprovincial barriers to trade as well as cross-border barriers to trade are difficult for businesses to maximize their own efficiencies with. And so what I've been doing is through the Regulatory Cooperation Council, lowering barriers to trade for Canadian businesses and ultimately American businesses, because this is a cross-border initiative with the United States. I mean, we've concluded the most recent round of negotiations under the Regulatory Cooperation Council, ensuring that things like barriers to trade for truckers are reduced at the border so that they can file a digital manifest at the border and not just a paper-based manifest. That will reduce long lines at the border where we see $3.3 billion of goods and services crossing the border every single day. Then interprovincially, Dominic LeBlanc and I have recently agreed with all provinces, or almost all provinces, that they will systematize, they will make consistent barriers to trade interprovincially, especially for truckers, so that we don't have trucks stopping when they cross provincial borders to change the way their lights are placed on the backs of their trucks. So these are the types of initiatives that will make a difference for the traveling of goods and services across this country and lower the cost of doing business for businesses across this country. Then thirdly, in my new portfolio, high frequency, high speed rail. I know that this is an issue that many of you have been thinking about positively, and that is an amazing thing because the government of Canada is going ahead with one of 3 bids that we have now received for high frequency, high speed rail. What I mean by that is each of those 3 bids that we have received from experts, internationally renowned experts in rail, contemplate high speed and high frequency rail. And so those bids are under consideration now, and a decision will be made about the future for this country. And why is it so important? Because rail is going to improve productivity. It's going to improve efficiency. It's going to lower carbon emissions, and it's going to allow for more housing to be built on these rail lines. So we are very much enthusiastic and looking forward to that. Now, I know I only have 5 minutes on the stage, so let me conclude by saying that, look, if we're talking about reducing barriers to trade, if we're talking about productivity, if we're talking about high speed, high frequency rail, yes, these are hard things. But I am so proud and honored to be able to lead them at the Government of Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, Minister Anand. You were recently named Transport Minister just a few weeks ago. You're one person in 2 different jobs, overseeing 2 very important, very different files. You're one person having to literally go from one building to another. You're in 2 different buildings working. For ordinary folks like us, how do you make this work?
So we do virtual meetings. We also invite people to come to me, but more seriously, look, being president of the Treasury Board involves collaborating, coordinating with every single ministry. And so throughout the course of my time at Treasury Board, I've become familiar with multiple different portfolios, especially the frequent flyers to Treasury Board, like transport. And so making it work really involves ensuring that I'm able to get to the key meetings that I need to be at. Treasury Board and transport each have set important meetings, but most importantly, I want to highlight the work of the public service, because the public service actually ensures that a minister can do her job. Procuring vaccines during the pandemic, becoming the most vaccinated country by July 2021. Yes, I was the Minister of Procurement at that time, but it was the public service that rose to the occasion and ensured that we were able to reach those milestones. So I'll just say, yes, I'm one woman. I'm making sure that the trains are on the tracks.
Trains are running on time, I think.
Yeah. But by the same token, it is the team behind you that makes sure that that occurs. Yes, it's a lot. But as I said to the Prime Minister when he asked me to take on this additional role, no problem. I'll get it done.
Let's talk about a little bit more about the public services you brought up, public spending review. You've been spearheading this review and previously announced that the federal government will be reallocating almost $2.3 billion in spending to critical issues like healthcare and housing. Can we expect another big announcement on your spending review? And if so, when would that be?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for raising the spending review because in a lot of the media discussion, the spending review, and that is repurposing expenditures towards the government's priorities is really lost. And in particular, I want to highlight that we have already repurposed $15.8 billion over 5 years and $4.8 billion ongoing. That's the first phase of the spending review. The second phase is launching now, which will be $4.2 billion over 4 years and $1.3 billion ongoing, as well as reducing the size of the public service by natural attrition by at least 5,000 people. So that is the spending review that you referred to. And yes, we have been able to reach these targets. We are tabling them in the estimates process, including in the main estimates process earlier this year. But yes, we are fully on track to be reaching these milestones. That's what I mean about the Treasury Board minister needing to collaborate with other ministers. So I had to go to every single minister and say, look, I need you to cut your operating budget and grants and contributions by 3%. And those are not fun conversations, of course, but they're enjoyable to some extent once you reach your milestones.
They're hard conversations, but need to be done. There's been a lot of attention on the expansion of the size of the federal public service, both in terms of number of people hired, but also in terms of wage growth. How will this play a factor in the Treasury Board spending review going forward?
So you're exactly right. The size of the public service has been a hot topic. And one of the things that really intrigues me, let's say it that way, when I read commentary about the size of the public service is how unnuanced it is, how it doesn't take into account that there are areas of the public service that we cannot afford to reduce employees in. Let's take cyber. Let's take AI. Let's take defense procurement. We need to build our capacity in those areas. So I really want to have a more nuanced discussion about the size of the public service. I also think it's important to have that conversation in the context of productivity in the public service overall. So the mandate of the working group that I talked about doesn't address size per se, but when you think about incorporating AI at a broad level to ensure more efficiency in government, you really do tangentially look at those other topics.
You spoke earlier about the working group on productivity that you launched within the federal public service. How will this working group address productivity challenges in the public sector? You talked a bit about updating legacy systems, for example.
Okay, well, the world is our oyster when it comes to the importance of addressing productivity in the public sector. And you point to legacy system overhaul. 100%. In order for passports to get delivered faster and processed faster, in order for employment benefits to get out the door faster, in order for benefits to roll out to Canadians more quickly, we need this overhaul of legacy systems. And no one has mentioned the Phoenix pay system yet, but I'm sure you're all thinking about it. We need to ensure that we have a pay system that works for public servants. And so when I first came on to the government ministerial role in procurement, that was my biggest challenge. This is pre-COVID. It remains our government's large challenge to ensure that we have systems that function effectively for those who are working within government, and so that our country as a whole, in the public or private sector, can function as efficiently as possible.
On the subject of productivity, there's been a lot of discussion over weak productivity. It's kind of hit a new peak in terms of debate in the last several months. The Bank of Canada Senior Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers called this a break the glass moment and called our low productivity an emergency. There's been some back and forth on who's to blame. Cabinet ministers have pointed fingers at companies' lack of business investment. Some executives would say that the blame may be on the government and an uncertain regulatory environment. How do you respond to that?
Well, I say that this is a complex problem, and blame should not be laid at the feet of one entity or business or sector alone, but we all have a responsibility to address the very issue of declining productivity. And from a governmental standpoint, what I am trying to do is within the public sector, an area that accounts for 40% of our country's GDP, when you look at all levels of government, there is something we can do. And that's why I moved very quickly to announce the working group mandate in terms of reference. But overall, I think the point is inherent in your question that within businesses themselves, we also need to ensure that there's an examination of aging infrastructure, aging technology, adoption of new technologies, and that is true within government as well. And so that's exactly what the public sector is going to do. We also need to have a broader conversation in this country about tangible ways to improve productivity. And I think that the government of Canada, like all governments, should be part of that analysis and addressing tangible solutions. This declining productivity GDP level is GDP per capita levels is very much top of mind for me.
And I'm sure for many in this room too. The government plays an important role in boosting private sector investment into the Canadian economy. Last week, you announced a $10 million commitment to purchase carbon removal services for greening the government. How will that initiative work, and what kind of companies is the government looking out for these services?
Okay, so let me just clarify in the question for everybody who didn't hear the announcement. I made an announcement last week that at least $10 million will be invested in carbon dioxide removal between now and 2030, 31. So we are looking at all options in terms of meeting those types of investments because of the commitment to carbon removal. But if I could take a step back, that's just one initiative that we are utilizing to address environmental sustainability. The Treasury Board operates or runs the greening government strategy overall. That is a very large job because we have about 40,000 government buildings, 40,000 government vehicles. We need to make sure that we are lowering carbon emissions within those two areas. And we've actually reduced our carbon emissions by 40%, which is our target by 2025. We are going to exceed that percentage. And I'm really looking forward to being able to announce that number as well. What else are we doing? Well, we're investing in battery plants, St. Thomas, Stellantis. We also have Northvolt, and these investments are a sign of a definite commitment to marrying environmental sustainability through zero emission vehicles with economic development. And that is why you have seen the Ford government come to the table, right? These are governments that historically, a provincial conservative government and a federal liberal government historically have not always seen eye to eye in terms of environmental sustainability. But when you think about environmental sustainability in terms of economic development, jobs for Canadians, and as well reducing carbon emissions, there is a symmetry that is there. And clearly we've been able to find it with the provincial government in Ontario.
Let's talk about the $2 billion that the government has committed to boosting AI infrastructure to help with the development of AI and make sure that Canada can still be a leader in terms of AI startups and researchers. In May, at an AI adoption conference, you said the government needs to deploy that money quickly. How's that going? How quick has it been? And given the fast nature of development in AI right now, what is the government doing to put that money to work fast?
There's nothing better than being quoted when you're in the middle of an interview post that conference. But let me just tell you that the use of AI in the government of Canada is already occurring. I've published 2 sets of guidelines in terms of generative AI, and we want to make sure that that continues. But generative AI is only one aspect of making government operations more efficient. So what we want to be able to do is be able to process data as quickly as possible using AI, and we need to ensure that we are doing that wherever possible. But that is going to be iterative. So the strategy will be announced next spring, and we will make sure that we are continuing to address the efficiencies that can be gained by AI. If I could just mention two other related areas, cybersecurity. I also announced a cybersecurity enterprise strategy for the Government of Canada so that individual government departments aren't running their own cybersecurity strategy, so that we have one overarching plan for the government against DDoS attacks, against malware, which we have seen increase since the illegal further invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And then finally, in terms of digital credentials, I'm sure everyone in this room would really love to have a one-stop shop with the Government of Canada. It is imperative that we have this increase in the efficiency with which individuals are interacting with the Government of Canada. We were allocated $10 million in budget 2024 to get digital credentials off the ground. And so we will continue to make sure that efficiencies are there for Canadians when they interact with us.
Okay. The U.S. election is less than 3 weeks away. What are you watching for in the outcome in terms of how it could impact your work at the Treasury Board and at Transport?
Well, for starters, I am very enthusiastic about the very positive tone that the race has taken in the last number of months, certainly on one side of that race. I will also say that we have to work with anyone who is in the White House. As I mentioned, $3.3 billion of trade in goods and services every single day pass through the Canada-US border. And we need to make sure that that continues regardless of the outcome in early November in terms of the White House presidency. As I said, Canada and the US, the relationship runs very deep, and that goes without saying, and we need that to continue.
If you want to be forward-thinking in your work leading the Treasury Board and at Transport, which you are doing big projects, the spending review, work and productivity, these are big issues. Are you concerned that you might be running out of time given the cabinet shuffles and potential big changes the government faces? How do you make progress while there are big shifts happening?
Time is of the essence. We got to keep moving. And in every meeting I am in, I'm looking for the deliverable and ensuring that there's follow-up and decisions are being made. And luckily in these two portfolios, there are a number of decisions that are in front of me that I'm making in very short order. There are some intractable issues that I cannot solve in a week or 2 weeks, such as the building of heavy infrastructure that is needed, such as processing permits that I think we need to make sure is done more quickly to get large projects out the door. I can't do many of those things alone, but I'm trying to push from the inside.
Great. Thank you, Minister, for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.